I heard you saying that most of self-help
Yeah,
systems or books do not help very much.
self-evidently.
Self-evidently, right? Yeah.
Well,
And you,
like we'd all be cured by now, right?
right. 'Cause
Where are all these people that have been helped?
right. So you go to somebody's house and there's like a whole wall of self-help books,
And you
right?
think, wow, you must be enlightened, dude. And like,
And they still have.
I don't know if you've noticed this. The people that have the most self-help books are the most neurotic people, self-help junkies.
Right.
You know, there are reasons for that. We consume vastly more self-help and self-improvement content than previous generations did. I said to you
But
earlier,
isn't that a good thing? It doesn't mean we're like open to
it
it.
would be good if it worked.
Right. So is Stoicism a self-help system?
In a sense, it is. It's an ancient self-help system.
So how is it different?
I think it's a better
First
system.
of all, do you think it works?
Yeah, I do think it works.
Why? Why does it work and the other ones are not?
Well, I'll answer first of all empirically what evidence is there that it works.
Sure, yeah.
The scientific research now emerging on Stoicism, incidentally, that validates some of the concepts and techniques. But up until now, most of the research had been indirect, and it had been that cognitive...
Can you check that? What was it?
Yeah.
There is evidence for Stoicism working better than other self-help models.
I didn't say it worked better than... I said we have evidence that it works.
That it works.
Yeah. There are pilot studies from... Tim LeBon is the research director of the Modern Stoicism non-profit organization. Okay. So he compiles...
In 2021, a study and its results showed a significant drop in negative thinking among people with strong tendency to worry.
There are a number of emerging studies on Stoicism.
Okay.
And there's indirect evidence from cognitive therapy. The cognitive therapy works, and it's based on similar principles.
Yeah, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. It works.
Yeah.
Why do you think it works?
Why do I think it works? Because it's based on the Socratic method, right? It doesn't give people an overly formulaic solution. There are formulas and pieces of advice in Stoicism, but it encourages...
Since you got here, I've been trying to get a formula out of you, and I couldn't get it. Like the closest we came was those cardinal values.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy we got that.
Oh, okay. I mean, the Stoics do have formulaic pieces of advice, but it's a philosophical system, right? They want us to question our assumptions and think for ourselves. So the way I would think of it is the self-help techniques are like the stabilizers on a bicycle, right? They can be useful, but we shouldn't become overly dependent on them. The most famous Stoic technique is there are many, but one of them, so the Socratic method is a technique, but the view from above is a well-known visualization technique. Marcus talks about it about like half a dozen times or so towards the end of the meditations, but you can find it in many other ancient texts. The view from above just consists in visualizing things as if you're looking down, like
a drone.
Yeah, basically. And you know, there's some people are doing research on that at the moment. There's some interest among psychologists in testing it because it has face validity. Clearly, if you visualize things from a broader perspective and also a wider chronological perspective, it clearly does something. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but that's more than you could say for a lot of psychological techniques, right? So it does something dramatic, psychologically. Clearly, it shifts your perspective dramatically. So, I mean, I don't know, like we might think it could help you, it could harm you, but it does something, right? It makes it worth testing.
Right.
And actually, it looks like, typically people say it increases their sense of equanimity. Now, there are other reasons why it has face validity. You could say it's like Zeus looking down from Mount Olympus, right? Taking a kind of elevated view of things. Also, in the ancient world, when they studied cosmology and tried to imagine the universe as a whole and theorize it, in a sense, they're doing a similar thing. They're contemplating themselves within a much wider context.
I have here learn to differentiate between internal, external desires and aversions. That's one. That's a big one. No? No?
Who wrote that?
Epictetus. No?
Learn to differentiate between...
internal and external desires and aversions. Eliminate desires for external rewards.
Yeah.
Did I...
That's what we were saying.
That? Yeah.
That's what we were saying earlier about the values, that he wants us to basically place more value on our character traits, on the virtues, rather than on external outcomes.
Train yourself to desire only improvement of agency. No.
Kind of. That's an odd way of phrasing it, but yeah, that's in a sense that's what he's saying.
Refine your logical skills. That's the rhetorics.
Yeah.
That's kind of self-evident. Understand your duty in life.
It's a bit vague.
It's a bit vague. Well, what do you think those are?
What do I think the techniques of Stoicism?
Yeah, like the bird view. What's the name for the bird view that you use?
The view from above.
The view from above, yes.
In the first book that I wrote, I tried to list as many as I could find, and I identified 18 distinct psychological strategies in Stoicism. So there are many. I guess if I was to pick a handful, contemplating your own death, contemplating the ideal sage, so imagining somebody who's completely wise and virtuous and how they would behave in different situations. Premeditatio malorum, so imagining misfortunes in advance in order to prepare yourself for them.
Exposure.
Yeah, it's like exposure therapy. The Socratic method, cognitive distancing, they kind of do. So actually that quote from Epictetus that says it's not, people are upset not by things but by their judgments about them. Grasping the meaning of that would actually bring about cognitive distancing. So it's actually a psychological technique, like to contemplate that phrase. But Epictetus not only tells his students that in many different ways, he actually teaches them today we have like, I don't know, half a dozen or more specific techniques that we can teach clients in therapy that bring about this shift in perspective. Epictetus does several. So the other one that he does is he says to his students, whenever you have a troubling impression, so like whenever you feel angry or something like that, you have an automatic thought, let's screw this guy, like you're angry or whatever. He said, speak to it and say, you're just an appearance and not at all the thing that you claim to represent. So he's doing actually two techniques combined there. He's apostrophizing or talking to his thoughts, which forces you to shift towards a kind of more objective point of view on them, as if you're observing someone else's thoughts. So that's cognitive distancing. But he's also saying to himself, you're just an impression. You're just like a representation. So he's separating the thought from the thing that it refers to. So rather than saying, if I say to myself, hey, this guy's a total jerk, he's saying, no, I just have the impression that he's a jerk. That's a perspective that I'm looking at him from. You know, it's not an intrinsic quality. He's not intrinsically a jerk. That's just my way of interpreting his behavior, right? So those are two separate techniques, basically, but they're closely related. We can actually see him telling his students to do that. There's another technique that he describes, which is really important in modern therapy. It's called postponement. It's actually the technical term for it is the stimulus control method of managing worry. He says to his students, when you notice yourself becoming upset, postpone going along with your initial impression. So he says withhold assent from it, which again is like cognitive distancing. So just observe your anger, like notice that it's a feeling that you have, that you don't have to agree with it or indulge in it or go along with it, and postpone responding to it until you've calmed down, right? So that's actually one of the main techniques that we use for generalized anxiety disorder, but it's also used in the treatment of clinical depression now as well. So people, when they notice that they're starting to ruminate or worry, will often be told to suspend responding to it. Say, I'm going to come back to this later, and wait until the mood has changed, or a later time of the day, a time of their choosing, and sit down and more deliberately think through the thing that they were previously worrying or ruminating about.
Makes sense,
So these guys were way ahead of the curve. I mean, I say that, I don't say that lightly, because it makes me cringe when I say it. You know, I think it sounds a little bit corny, but really, I'm not kidding. Like, the Stoics actually, in many regards, it genuinely, to this day, surprises me that they have these kind of insights. You know, there might be reasons for that. We definitely seem to have lost sight of a lot of these ideas. I mean, I can emphasize that by saying, you might say, well, cognitive behavioral therapy arrived at similar conclusions. Yeah, but for the first half of the 20th century, everyone was doing psychoanalysis, almost like most people were. And that bears very little resemblance to what the Stoics were saying. So if you think that what Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus is saying is common sense or obvious, wasn't common sense to Freud or Jung or any of those guys or Melanie Klein or the rest of them, right? There's nothing like what they were doing. You know, Ellis and Beck came along, suddenly it became validated again, became common sense. So it wasn't obvious to people.
Did they have access to Stoic writings?
Yeah.
Freud, and have they read it?
I don't know if they read.
Marcus Aurelius?
I'm not aware, of whether they'd actually read them or not.
But you would think somebody like Jung, who was a brilliant mind, who went through the entire classics, he must
Yeah.
have been aware of that, no? Has he commented on it?
I'm not aware of Jung commenting on the Stoics to the best of my knowledge. But Jung must have read other kind of adjacent stuff.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah.
I mean, for a start, the concept of the archetypes is taken from Neoplatonism. It's a Platonic ideal. So he must have had some familiarity with Greek philosophy, but I don't know how much of it he'd actually read. There was another psychotherapist at the start of the 20th century called Paul Dubois, who was a Swiss psychiatrist. He was very famous. Proust was one of his clients, reputedly, and he was a rival of Freud. He had many followers, and he was...
What was his name?
Paul Dubois.
Paul Dubois.
And he was really into Stoicism, and he prescribed reading Seneca's letters to his patients. But then everyone forgot about him, and they were much more interested. Freud eclipsed him. So we had a go at Stoic psychotherapy that was pretty influential at the start of the 20th century, and then it disappeared for a while because it got eclipsed by Freudianism. Everyone became interested in that.
So he was just, okay.